I should have trusted my gut. From the moment Camille told me her mother invited us to Thanksgiving dinner, something in me bristled. Not because I don't enjoy a good meal or because I don't love my wife's family, well, most of them, but because in 6 years of marriage, Melinda Royce had never once asked me to her house. Not for birthdays, not for Christmas, not even to help move a couch when Camille's father threw his back out. Her silence had been her answer. And now, suddenly, she wanted us all together? She even asked what kind of wine you like, Camille said as we sat in the kitchen, a hopeful glimmer in her eyes. Maybe she's finally trying, babe. I nodded slowly, not wanting to puncture the small hope she was clinging to. I could have said a lot in that moment. Like how Melinda had once referred to me as that accountant with the baby face at a family barbecue, thinking I wasn't within earshot. Or the time she sent Camille a list of fertility clinics with a just in case your real man isn't producing. But I bit my tongue. Camille wanted peace. And deep down, I wanted it too. So I said, let's do it. But the moment we pulled up to the Royce's estate that Thursday morning, I knew I'd made a mistake. It was cold out, early November chill creeping into my collar as I helped Camille out of the car with the pie she made. The house stood like a monument to old money and older grudges. White columns, tall hedges, and that American flag flapping like it was guarding something sacred. Melinda's version of patriotism was having Thanksgiving in a house that looked like George Washington might have once sneezed in it. Maybe this'll be good, Camille whispered, her voice trembling just slightly. She knew it too. That tension, that pressure, that feeling like we were walking into something staged. We stepped inside and were met by her brother, Mason, who barely looked up from his phone. Hey, he muttered, before turning his attention back to whatever stocks or sports scores he was obsessing over. Her younger sister Trinity appeared next, all glowing and maternal, her newborn twins strapped to her chest like trophies. She looked like a goddess in cream cashmere, surrounded by cooing relatives. And then came Melinda. She glided down the staircase like a queen at her own coronation. Hair curled, pearl earrings, and a smile that didn't reach her eyes. Oh, look who finally made it, she said, kissing Camille's cheek and then glancing at me with the kind of warmth you reserve for someone tracking dirt across a clean floor. I smiled politely. Happy Thanksgiving, Melinda. She looked me over and leaned in, lowering her voice just enough to still be heard by everyone nearby. No gifts, she said with a raise of her eyebrow, loud enough to make Trinity smirk. I shrugged. Camille brought her famous sweet potato pie. And you? She asked, still smiling. I didn't answer. I just held up the wine bag in my hand and walked toward the dining room. Camille squeezed my hand. I'm sorry, she whispered. Don't be, I said. I'm used to it. The truth is, I wasn't. Not really. You don't get used to being made to feel like the spare tire of a marriage. Like you're just there in case someone better doesn't come along. We mingled, we smiled, we made polite conversation. Melinda introduced me to someone as Camille's husband, Theo. He does accounting or something. That was followed by a lecture about how real men use their hands, not just calculators. I poured myself a generous glass of wine. Then the dinner bell rang. Everyone shuffled into the dining room. A massive table had been set, stretching nearly the length of the room. Crystal glasses, fine china, candlesticks like miniature obelisks. It looked like a magazine spread. Melinda was orchestrating seating like a symphony conductor. Mason, here. Trinity, next to Mom. Harold, head of the table. And Camille, sweetie, you're right here, next to your husband. I made my way toward the spot she indicated. But as I reached the chair, I froze. There it was. A bright pink plastic plate, the kind you give to toddlers to stop them from breaking real dishes. It was decorated with cartoon unicorns and smiling suns, with a matching fork and spoon that looked like they came from a kid's birthday party. In front of everyone. While everyone else had elegant white porcelain, I got the toy plate. I looked at Camille. Her face had gone pale. What is this? I asked, quiet but clear. Melinda didn't even blink. Well, she said, sipping from her wine glass, since you're impotent and can't give my daughter children, I figured you might as well eat like one. The room went still. I could hear the clink of Mason's fork against his glass. I could feel the burn rising in my chest. Camille's mouth opened in horror. Trinity actually gasped. One of the babies let out a small whine, almost like even they could sense the venom in the air. My vision tunneled slightly, but I didn't yell. I didn't throw the plate across the room, though I wanted to. Instead, I reached into my coat pocket and pulled out a white envelope. The one I'd carried for weeks. The one Camille asked me not to ever show. And then, I looked up at Melinda. Actually, I said, my voice calm, steady, I have something to show everyone. The smile on her face twitched. What are you doing? Camille whispered, her voice barely audible. I turned to her gently. I'm sorry, love, but this ends today. I placed the envelope on the table, right next to the unicorns and smiling suns. Because if they wanted a circus, I'd give them a final act they wouldn't forget. We pulled up to the Royce estate just after noon, and the sky looked like it had swallowed the sun. That sort of gray, hollow overcast that feels like the day itself is bracing for a storm. I parked the car in the long driveway behind Mason's ridiculous cherry-red convertible, the one he bought after getting promoted at his finance firm. He always parked crooked, like even his car refused to share space with anyone else. Camille smoothed her dress in the passenger seat and glanced at the front of the house. It looks festive, she said, though her voice betrayed a bit of doubt. Melinda probably hired someone to decorate, I replied, stepping out and grabbing the pie from the back seat. God forbid she hang a wreath herself. Camille gave me a look, part scolding, part amused. Please, she said softly. Just today? No jabs. Let's get through this. Okay, I said. Just for today. The front door swung open before we even made it to the steps. Trinity stood there with both babies strapped to her front in some kind of baby harness contraption, a glass of wine already in her hand. Finally, she chirped, barely hiding the edge in her voice. We thought you were skipping. Happy Thanksgiving, Trinity, Camille said, offering her a quick kiss on the cheek. I nodded politely. Come in, she said, stepping aside like she owned the place. Mason and Mom are already half a bottle in. As we stepped into the foyer, I was hit by the scent of cinnamon and something overly floral, like the whole house had been sprayed with potpourri and anxiety. The crystal chandelier sparkled overhead, a grandiose centerpiece in a home that felt more curated than lived in. And then I saw him. Mason, sitting on the velvet love seat in the drawing room, legs crossed, holding a tumbler of scotch like he was starring in his own holiday movie. He looked up from his phone and smirked. Well, if it isn't the Royce accountant, he said, his voice dripping with sarcasm. Hi, Mason, Camille said quickly before I could respond. Melinda's voice cut through the hallway like a bell tower. They're here. She entered from the dining room wearing a burgundy cashmere sweater and pearls that looked real enough to strangle someone with. Her lips were painted too red, her eyes too sharp. Camille, she said, arms open. Sweetheart, look at you. Camille smiled and accepted the hug. Then Melinda turned to me and offered nothing. No hug, no handshake. Just a glance. I didn't expect affection. I would have settled for decency. We brought pie, Camille offered. How thoughtful, Melinda replied, not even looking at it. I suppose it'll go well with the assortment I already made. Then came the moment I should have expected, but still caught me off guard. Her eyes flicked to my hands. No gifts, she asked, again loud enough for everyone to hear. She had a knack for turning questions into knives. I inhaled through my nose, steady. We figured dessert was a good contribution. Of course, she said with a small smile. Just thought maybe Theo would bring something for the babies. It's their first Thanksgiving, after all. I glanced at Trinity, who was busy adjusting the headband on one of her twins. She didn't look up. I doubted she even cared. But Melinda wanted the moment to sting. Camille stepped in. We'll go put our coats away. Smart move. Get out before the opening jabs turned into open war. We headed down the hallway to the guest room, where we usually left our things. As we passed the kitchen, I saw Melinda whispering something to Mason, who chuckled and shook his head. I didn't hear the words, but I didn't need to. I'd spent 6 years reading between her lines. If she was kind, it was only to set you up for a harder fall. We returned to the living room where most of the family had gathered. Trinity's husband, Felix, was wrangling one of the babies who had spit up on his sleeve. Melinda walked around with a tray of spiced cider like she was the first lady of Thanksgiving. I accepted a glass and stood near the fireplace while Camille chatted with her Aunt Joyce about yoga retreats and essential oils. I could feel eyes glancing toward me every so often, nothing direct, just those side glances people make when they're trying to read a headline off your face. I sipped the cider. Too sweet. Then I checked my watch. Dinner's almost ready, Melinda announced cheerfully, so everyone find your seat. We all drifted toward the dining room like her words pulled us with invisible strings. That room looked like a magazine cover. Polished oak table, perfect white tablecloth, gold-rimmed china, candles, handwritten place cards. A roast turkey the size of a toddler in the center. I scanned the table. Mason's place was front and center. Trinity next to their parents. Camille's spot was 3 chairs from the head, beside me. Then I saw it. My plate. Pink. Plastic. Covered in dancing unicorns, stars, and smiling suns. A matching cartoon fork and spoon. I stared at it, half expecting it to disappear. Maybe it was a joke. A mistake. It wasn't. Melinda passed behind me and, without even glancing, said, "Since you're impotent and can't give my daughter children, you might as well eat like one." There was a moment of pure stillness, like the entire room exhaled at once and then held its breath. Trinity looked stunned. Felix blinked. Camille's mouth parted, a soft whisper escaping. "Mom." Someone let out a half-laugh that turned into a cough. My throat tightened, but I didn't speak. Not yet. Instead, I took a slow breath, reached into the inside pocket of my coat, and felt the envelope brush against my fingers. I hadn't planned to use it. I'd brought it for closure, just in case. Now it felt necessary. I slipped my fingers around the paper. Camille looked at me in horror. "Theo," she said softly. "Please. Not here." I nodded once, not making any promises. Because the decision was already made. Let them have their show. They just didn't realize I'd brought the final scene. I didn't sit right away. I stood there, staring at the plate like it might disappear if I just blinked hard enough. But there it stayed, plastic pink, grinning with unicorns and sunshine like some cruel inside joke. The matching fork and spoon, rounded and rubber-tipped as if to keep me from hurting myself, only made it worse. The entire thing looked like it belonged in a daycare, not a Thanksgiving dining room surrounded by crystal and gold-rimmed china. The longer I stood, the more the silence spread. No one knew where to look. Camille was frozen beside me, her hand halfway between reaching for mine and clutching her stomach. Mason leaned back in his seat, clearly amused. Trinity glanced from me to Melinda, unsure whether to laugh or wince. Even her baby seemed to quiet down as if the air itself had shifted. Melinda didn't sit either. She hovered near her seat like she was posing for a family portrait, her fingers delicately resting on the back of her chair, chin lifted slightly. The queen of the table. "That seat is for you, Theo," she said sweetly, like she was offering me a gift. "Don't be shy." I turned my head slowly toward her, and for a moment I didn't recognize the sound of my own voice. "Are you serious?" She blinked at me, her expression full of polite confusion. "What? It's just a plate." "No," I said, my voice firmer this time. "It's not." Camille stepped in quickly, her voice barely above a whisper. "Mom, this is too much." Melinda shrugged. "It's Thanksgiving. It's a joke. Lighten up. I thought we were family." "Jokes usually involve people laughing," I said, still standing, still not touching that seat. "Does anyone here think this is funny?" Mason smirked but stayed silent. Trinity shifted uncomfortably in her chair. Camille looked at me, then at her mother, then back to me again. Torn in that impossible place between the family she came from and the one she chose. Melinda finally sat down with a long, exaggerated sigh, as if I were the one causing a scene. "Honestly, it's not that deep. But if you're going to make this awkward, then by all means." I should have walked out. Every inch of my body told me to leave. To take Camille's hand, get back in the car, and spend Thanksgiving somewhere peaceful. Somewhere kind. But I didn't. Because something shifted inside me in that moment, not just anger, but clarity. A cold, quiet knowing that this wasn't going to stop unless I made it stop. So I sat down. Right there, at the end of the grand table, across from Mason and 2 seats down from the woman who believed I was less than a man. I placed my cloth napkin in my lap. And then, deliberately, I reached into my coat pocket. The envelope was still warm from being close to my chest. I held it gently, like something sacred, and placed it next to the pink plate with slow precision. My hands didn't tremble. Camille's eyes went wide. "Theo," she whispered urgently, "not here." "I didn't come here to be humiliated," I said quietly, just to her. "I know," she whispered back. "But please don't do this. Not like this." Across the table, Melinda poured herself another glass of wine, looking quite pleased. "Camille, are you seriously defending this overreaction? It's a plastic plate. He's acting like I ran him over with a bus." "No, Melinda," I said, finally raising my voice slightly. "You're acting like I'm invisible. Like the last 3 years of pain and confusion and whispered accusations never happened. Like everything that's been thrown at me, from the passive-aggressive comments to the mail infertility pamphlets, was just a little harmless teasing." "You're being dramatic," she said. Again, Camille stood up, and that got everyone's attention. She wasn't a loud person. Camille was the gentle one, the peacemaker. But her voice came out sharp and clear this time. Stop. All of you. Just stop. Everyone went still. She looked around the table, her eyes fierce. My husband has been blamed, mocked, and disrespected by this family for years. For something we never talked about, because it was private, because it was painful. And now you've dragged it out in front of everyone like it's some kind of party trick. Melinda blinked, clearly caught off guard. Camille turned to me. I told you not to bring the papers. I asked you to let it go. But now, seeing this, she motioned toward the plate, her voice cracking. I understand why you had to. I didn't move. Not yet. Then Camille slowly nodded. Do it. That was the permission I hadn't known I was waiting for. I stood up and took the envelope in my hand. I want to make something clear, I began, addressing the whole table. We've been trying to have children for 3 years. And for 3 years, I've taken the silent blame. I've watched people, especially one person, imply that I was somehow less of a man, that I was the reason Camille doesn't have a child yet. And I kept my mouth shut. Out of respect. Melinda raised her glass again but didn't sip. Her face had gone rigid. But respect, I continued, goes both ways. I opened the envelope slowly and removed the single page inside. These are results from a fertility clinic. They're not mine. Mine came back normal. These are Camille's. I let the words settle. She was diagnosed with premature ovarian failure. Her egg supply is gone. No natural conception is possible. And she's known this. I've known this. We've tried hormone treatments. We've discussed IVF with donors. We've gone through grief and hope and back again. Together. Trinity had stopped chewing. Felix looked like he wanted to crawl under the table. Mason was finally silent. Camille sat back down slowly, her hand trembling in her lap. I never said anything, I added, softer now, because it wasn't anyone's business. But if my manhood is going to be mocked with pink plastic at a dinner table, then let's put the truth out there. I folded the page and set it beside my untouched plate. Then I sat down again. Melinda didn't say a word. Her wine glass was still in her hand, but her grip had tightened so hard that her knuckles had turned white. She stared at me like I'd just spoken in another language. Harold cleared his throat at the head of the table. Well, he said awkwardly. Shall we say grace? No one answered. No one even moved. Except me. I reached for my napkin again and started cutting my turkey. For a second, maybe longer, everything in that room stopped. I don't mean people just paused. I mean the air itself seemed to go still, like the house was holding its breath, afraid to make a sound after what had just been said. The test results sat on the table, plain white against all the polished wood and gold-rimmed china. A stark little truth dropped into the middle of a curated holiday lie. No one reached for the turkey. No one passed a dish. Even the babies in Trinity's arms went silent, as if the weight of the words had pressed down on every soul in that room, no matter how small. Camille sat beside me, shoulders tight, eyes fixed on the envelope. She didn't speak. She didn't have to. Her silence was louder than any outburst. And honestly, I didn't know whether that silence was heartbreak or relief. Melinda, for once in her life, didn't know what to do with her mouth. Her lips parted slightly, eyes locked on the paper in front of me like it might suddenly burst into flames. She hadn't moved since I sat back down, wine glass still clutched between two tense fingers, her perfectly manicured nails digging into the stem. Harold, her husband, quiet, armless Harold, was the first to blink out of the trance. He cleared his throat and reached for the carving knife. Well, he stammered. Maybe we should, No, Camille said suddenly, her voice sharp. It cut through the tension like glass shattering on tile. We're not going to pretend that didn't happen. Not this time. Not again. Everyone turned to look at her. Even I wasn't expecting her to speak up like that. Camille was calm by nature, someone who handled conflict like it was hot coal. Pass it quickly, don't get burned. But something had changed in her. I saw it in her face. She was done carrying guilt that day. Not because I was ashamed of them, but because I thought I could still protect this family from itself. From the judgment, from the assumptions, from the cruelty disguised as jokes. Melinda shifted slightly, but Camille wasn't finished. I've spent years trying to earn your approval, Mom. Years pretending your comments didn't hurt. Years laughing when you poked fun at us not having children, like that was ever a joke to me. Or to him. She nodded toward me. I let it happen, and that's on me. The room was so still I could hear the ticking of the clock above the fireplace. I didn't want you to know I was broken, Camille said finally, the words catching in her throat. But I'm not anymore. Because I'm not hiding it. I'm not hiding me. And I'm sure as hell done letting you humiliate my husband to protect your fantasy of what a family should be. She stopped. Her voice cracked on the last word, and I saw a tear slide down her cheek. She wiped it quickly with the back of her hand, not wanting pity, just release. Across the table, Trinity set her glass down with a loud clink. You have no idea how long I've wanted someone to say that, she said quietly. Melinda turned toward her daughter in disbelief. Trinity. No, Mom, she interrupted, her voice calm but cold. You've done this for years. Controlled the conversation. Weaponized concern. You did it to me when I married Felix. You said I was rushing into motherhood just to beat Camille to the finish line. You even told Aunt Joyce that Camille wasn't cut out for kids because she was too career-focused. And now look. Joyce looked up from her seat at the far end and muttered. She told me that. All right. Melinda's mouth opened, then closed. For a woman who always had the last word, silence didn't fit her well. I took a sip of water and glanced at Mason. He hadn't said a word through any of it. No smug comments, no sarcastic digs. He just stared at his plate, fork turning slowly in his hand like he couldn't decide what to do with it. For once, he looked unsure. Harold set the carving knife down again and exhaled. Well, I think that's more truth than this table has seen in a decade. Maybe ever, Trinity added. Still, Melinda said nothing. Her face was pale now, like all the color had been drained from it. Her shoulders were stiff, lips slightly trembling, as if every insult she'd ever thrown was rushing back toward her all at once. Finally, she stood. She didn't make a speech. Didn't defend herself. She just stood up, walked out of the dining room, and disappeared down the hall toward the kitchen. The silence that followed was different. Not heavy, but light. Like something had been lifted. Like the room had finally exhaled. Camille leaned into me, resting her head briefly against my shoulder. You okay? She whispered. I'm fine, I said, quietly. Are you? She nodded, wiping another tear with the corner of her napkin. I think so. For the first time in a long time, people started moving again. Felix took one of the babies upstairs to change a diaper. Joyce began pouring more wine. Trinity started collecting empty plates from the kids' end of the table. It wasn't normal. It wasn't comfortable. But it was real. And for this family, that was new. Camille turned toward me. I'm sorry it had to happen like this. I reached for her hand under the table. I'm not. You're not. No, I said. Because now it's out. No more pretending. No more whispers behind closed doors. Camille gave a soft laugh. You and that unicorn plate, she said, shaking her head. I'll never forget it. Neither will I said. I glanced at the plate again. It looked smaller now, ridiculous even. But it had done its job. It had exposed the cracks hiding beneath polished smiles and picture-perfect dinners. And sometimes, you need something to break you. Before anyone even thinks about fixing it. I didn't plan on laying it all out like that. I didn't walk into that house with some grand vision of turning Thanksgiving into a courtroom. But sometimes the weight of silence builds up like a dam, and all it takes is one crack, one pink, plastic plate, and suddenly everything you've been holding in for years comes flooding out. And once it's out, you can't take it back. Not that I wanted to. The envelope still sat on the table beside me, unopened now but exposed. Like a piece of evidence laid bare for everyone to see. I didn't need to hold it up again. The words I'd spoken had already lodged themselves into everyone's minds like thorns. No more wondering. No more assumptions. No more snide jokes about trying harder or suggestions about freezing peace. The mystery had been solved, and no one saw it coming. I looked across the table and watched Trinity pick at her mashed potatoes without eating. The color had drained from her face, and her usually chirpy demeanor had dimmed into something more serious. Camille still sat beside me, back straight, hands folded in her lap, her eyes heavy but unashamed. I could feel her breath start to steady next to me. Her father, Harold, finally spoke again. I remember when you both started talking about kids, he said, voice low, like he was reminiscing about a happier time. Your mom said it was just nerves. That you were too modern. Waiting too long, too focused on work. He shook his head slowly. But I watched the way you looked at babies, Camille. Every time Trinity brought hers around, your whole body ached for one. I could tell. Camille's lower lip trembled slightly. Harold looked over at me, and I saw how you looked at her. Like you'd give anything to take that pain away from her. I didn't answer. I couldn't. For all the ways Melinda had mocked me, Camille's father had never joined in. He had mostly stayed in the background, one hand on his scotch and the other on the remote control, avoiding the crossfire. I'd always assumed he was just disengaged. But now I realized he'd been watching, quietly, maybe even helplessly. I should have said something sooner, he added. Should have shut it down. Camille offered him a soft smile, but I could see the hurt underneath it. Melinda still hadn't returned. Maybe she'd gone upstairs to hide in the shadow of her own embarrassment. Or maybe she was in the kitchen, pacing, rewriting the scene in her head so she could return with the perfect retort. With Melinda, silence was never a natural state. It was strategy. But this time, I think the silence had beaten her. I still don't understand why you never told anyone, Trinity said suddenly, her voice gentler now. Why you both kept it so secret. Camille turned toward her sister, and for a moment I thought she might deflect. But she didn't. Because Mom would have made it about her, she said plainly. She would have blamed Theo. Or she would have said I waited too long. Or that I was selfish. She would have spun it into something ugly. And I didn't want our pain turned into another Royce scandal to whisper about over cocktails. Trinity nodded slowly. You're not wrong. Camille reached for her glass of water and sipped. Then, setting it down, she added, we didn't tell anyone because we were still grieving. We were still processing it. Every time I saw a pregnancy announcement, or walked by a stroller, or saw a kid giggling in a grocery cart, I felt like the world was reminding me of what I couldn't have. She turned to me. And through it all, he stayed. Every doctor's appointment, every round of tests, every long night where I cried into the pillow because my body betrayed me. Theo never once blamed me, never once pulled away, never made me feel like I was less. I looked down, not out of shame, but to keep my composure. You didn't have to say that, I whispered. Yes, I did, she replied. Across the table, Mason finally stirred. He had been silent since the moment I revealed the diagnosis, his plate untouched, his smugness gone. And when he did speak, his voice lacked its usual bite. I always thought you were the weak one, he said, looking directly at me. Camille flinched slightly, but I held his gaze. And now? I asked. He nodded slowly, almost like it hurt. Now I'm not so sure. That, for Mason, was the closest I'd ever get to an apology. I didn't know, he added, quieter. I mean, I had no idea it was Camille. You weren't supposed to, I said. It wasn't about protecting her reputation. It was about protecting her heart. A long pause stretched between us. Mason sat back in his chair and let out a breath. Well, he said, picking up his fork again. Now I feel like a jackass. Trinity chuckled dryly. You kind of are. And then, as if on cue, the baby in her lap let out a loud gurgling cry, reminding everyone in the room that life continued, even when we felt like it didn't. Felix took the baby gently, standing up with a nod toward Camille. For what it's worth, I'm sorry too. And I admire how you two handled it. Most people would have fallen apart. We almost did, Camille said softly. But you didn't, he said. We ate, finally. Quietly, reflectively. The food was still warm. The wine still poured. But the meal felt different now, less like a celebration and more like a wake for the years we'd lost to pretending. Still, it wasn't bitter. If anything, there was a strange calm about it, like the calm that follows a long-awaited storm. When dessert arrived, pecan and pumpkin pies arranged with unnecessary perfection on sterling platters, Camille didn't move to serve. She just sat there, resting her head gently against my shoulder. I'm tired, she whispered. Me too. But I feel lighter. I kissed the top of her head. That's what happens when you stop carrying something that was never yours to carry alone. Then, as the final slices of pie were served and the clinking of forks began again, Melinda returned. She didn't speak. Not yet. But when I looked up, I saw something I'd never seen on her face. Not anger. Not smugness. Not control. Shame. And maybe, just maybe, the start of understanding. Melinda didn't say a word when she stepped back into the room. She stood in the doorway for a moment, backlit by the kitchen light behind her. Her sweater looked slightly rumpled, her lipstick had faded, and her eyes, always sharp, always judgmental, looked strangely vacant. For once, the woman who usually commanded the room just existed in it. Quiet. Small. She walked slowly back to her seat, sat down, and folded her napkin in her lap with practiced elegance, like muscle memory was carrying her where her mind had gone numb. Nobody moved. Camille didn't speak. Trinity avoided eye contact. Mason picked up his wine but didn't sip it. Even the babies were quiet again, as if something in the room told them this moment wasn't one to interrupt. I watched her. Not out of spite. Not with the satisfaction people might expect. I wasn't gloating. I was observing something I never thought I'd witness. The unraveling of Melinda Royce. It didn't happen with screaming or broken dishes. No chairs were thrown. No dramatic exits. Her fall was quieter than I imagined. Like watching a fine porcelain statue develop hairline cracks too small to notice at first, but spreading, inevitable. She reached for her glass of wine and took a sip. Her hand trembled slightly, just enough for the rim to tap her front tooth. "Dessert's very good," she said at last, her voice barely above a whisper. "Who made the pecan?" Trinity blinked, then hesitantly answered, "Camille did." "Like always." Melinda nodded and set her glass down. "It's perfect." Camille didn't respond. Melinda's eyes drifted toward me. Her mouth opened slightly, but no words came out. She looked like she wanted to say something, maybe apologize, maybe explain. But nothing landed. Just silence and the faint clink of forks on porcelain as the rest of the table awkwardly resumed dessert. Harold watched his wife carefully, cautiously. He'd seen her break down before, I imagined, but never publicly. This was different. This wasn't a meltdown. It was a quiet collapse, and he didn't seem to know how to catch her this time. I picked up my fork and resumed eating, if only to do something with my hands. The pie really was good, even if my appetite had long since vanished. Camille sat upright now, composed but distant. Her eyes weren't on the table, or the food, or even her mother. They were somewhere far off, processing, sorting, healing in the small ways people do when the chaos pauses long enough to breathe. Melinda finally spoke again. "I didn't know," she said. The sentence came out flat, empty. I set my fork down. "You didn't want to know." That got her attention. She turned to me, her eyes glistening. "That's not fair, isn't it?" I asked, my voice even. Camille shifted slightly, not to stop me, just to show she was listening. "You didn't want to know the truth," I continued, "because the truth would have ruined the story you built in your head. The one where I was the weak link. The problem. The one who couldn't give your daughter the life you wanted for her. I didn't mean to." "You meant everything you said," Camille interrupted. Her voice wasn't angry. It was tired, resigned. "You've meant every jab, every comment, every suggestion that I married beneath me. You knew exactly what you were doing." Melinda flinched, and I saw it. That tiny wince in her shoulders. Maybe the words were finally reaching her. Or maybe it was just the first time anyone had ever said them out loud. "I thought I was protecting you," she said. "I really believe that." "No," Camille replied. "You were protecting your pride. You were embarrassed that your daughter didn't have a baby bump to show off while your friends bragged about their grandchildren. You wanted something to blame, and Theo was convenient." Melinda's jaw tensed. Her fingers twisted the edge of her napkin slowly. "I just didn't want you to miss out on the life I had." "And maybe I didn't want your life," Camille snapped. That silenced everyone again. Camille rarely snapped. But when she did, it was like thunder rolling over a quiet field. Melinda stared at her, stunned. Camille went on. "You think I've been miserable without kids? That I cry myself to sleep every night wishing for some suburban fantasy you can parade in front of the neighbors. And yes, it hurt. For a long time, it hurt like hell. But I found joy in other things. In work. In travel. In my marriage. You didn't see that because it didn't fit your image of what my life should be." "I was wrong," Melinda said softly. Camille tilted her head. "What exactly were you wrong about?" Melinda hesitated. Then she looked at me. "I was wrong about him." I blinked. Of all the things I expected her to say, that wasn't one of them. "I thought Theo wasn't strong enough," she went on. "Too quiet. Too soft. But it takes strength to carry a burden like that. To stay silent. To protect someone from judgment. To sit at this table year after year and never lash out." Her voice cracked. "You've been stronger than I ever gave you credit for." My throat tightened, but I said nothing. I just looked at Camille, who was watching her mother like she was seeing a stranger trying to wear a familiar face. "I'm not asking for forgiveness," Melinda added. "Not now, but I needed to say it. Out loud. Before it ate me alive." Camille looked at me, silently asking what I thought. I didn't know how to answer. What do you do when a person like that, proud, callous, unbending, finally breaks? You don't kick them while they're down, but you don't rush to lift them either. You let them sit with the damage. Let them feel the porcelain cracking, because only then will they decide whether they want to fix it. Melinda stood slowly. "I'll be in the kitchen," she said, "if anyone wants to talk." She walked out quietly. No dramatic exit. Just gone. The room remained still for a long while. Then Trinity reached for her water, cleared her throat, and whispered, "Well, This is the weirdest Thanksgiving we've ever had. A chuckle escaped from Mason. Yeah, no contest. Joyce raised her glass. To the weirdest one, and the realest. We all raised our glasses too. Even Camille. I looked down at the pink plastic plate still sitting beside me. Still bright. Still ridiculous. But somehow, it no longer felt like a weapon. It felt like a relic. A symbol of what was, and what might never be again. Melinda didn't return for the rest of dinner. She stayed upstairs, door shut, and the house finally exhaled. For once, the Royce home didn't feel like a courtroom. No one was on trial. No one was measuring worth with smug looks or backhanded compliments. The tension that had ruled every holiday meal for years was gone, not replaced with comfort, but with something more honest. A strange, quiet vulnerability. Harold excused himself to bring a plate up to Melinda. He didn't say much, just rose from his chair, took a generous helping of turkey and mashed potatoes, and disappeared up the carpeted staircase. When he returned, he looked like someone who'd just sat through a storm and realized the roof still held, but only barely. "She's not speaking," he said quietly as he sat down again. "Maybe that's for the best." Nobody disagreed. Camille sat beside me, her body slightly angled toward mine, one leg hooked gently around my ankle beneath the table. It was the kind of closeness that didn't need words. A quiet confirmation that we were still here, still standing, still together. "I didn't expect that," she said softly, leaning toward me. "What part?" "All of it. You. Her. The way the whole thing just cracked open." I looked down at my now cold plate. The pink one had been replaced with a real plate at some point. Joyce, I think, had quietly swapped it out while no one was looking. But I still saw the plastic edges in my memory, the way it glowed under the chandelier, ridiculous and cruel. I didn't plan to say anything, I admitted. But when she put that plate down, "I know," Camille said quickly. "You had to. And I'm glad you did." Her voice wavered slightly. She wasn't just talking about the plate. She was talking about years of swallowing hurt. Years of pretending she didn't hear the comments. Years of playing the role of the perfect daughter while being slowly chipped away inside. I placed my hand over hers. Across the table, Mason was uncharacteristically quiet. He'd taken to sipping his wine in silence, eyes fixed on the tablecloth like it held answers he didn't want to say out loud. The smugness had drained from him. So had the snide remarks. It was almost unsettling, like watching a lion voluntarily curl up in a kennel. "You okay?" I asked Camille again, just to be sure. "I think so," she said. "I think I'm still figuring out what okay means now." That made sense to me. So much of our lives had been shaped by unspoken things, expectations, assumptions, shame. Melinda's need to control, to perform, to preserve the illusion of perfection. Our silence had kept the family dynamic intact for years. But it wasn't intact. It had been rotting from the inside. And today, it finally caved. I didn't regret it. But I also didn't feel victorious. Because the truth didn't come without cost. Upstairs, a door creaked faintly. No footsteps followed. We all heard it, but no one commented. Instead, Trinity started clearing plates, her usual chirpy energy dimmed into something more focused. She moved slower than usual, more carefully, like someone carrying something fragile. Maybe she was. Her husband Felix took the babies to the playpen in the living room, muttering something about getting them away from this emotional roller coaster. I envied his simplicity. His role in all this was minimal, peripheral. Mine wasn't. "Do you think she'll tell?" Neither did I. The same was silence and performance and paper-thin civility. If we were going to build something real, something better, it had to come from truth. And truth came at a price. Mason finally spoke. "You know what's messed up?" he said, still not looking up. Everyone waited. "I always thought you were the weak one," he muttered. "The outsider. The one who got lucky marrying in." I let him speak. I didn't interrupt. "But you sat here and took it. Year after year. Smile after fake smile. You never swung back. You never snapped. And today, you stood up and said the thing we've all been too scared to say. You weren't the weak one." I blinked, unsure how to respond. "I was," he added. That shocked me more than anything else that day. Trinity, who had just returned with a new tray of pie slices, paused at the sound of his words. She didn't mock him. She just handed him a slice and walked away, like his confession earned him dessert. Camille exhaled beside me. "I feel like we've been pretending for so long I forgot how to stop." "You just did," I said. "I know," she whispered. "And it feels strange. But also good." We sat there for a while, just breathing, letting it all settle. No more explosions. No more speeches. Just quiet. Stillness. The breakdown wasn't loud. It wasn't explosive. But it was real. The walls didn't come down with a bang. They just eroded until there was nowhere left to hide. Melinda didn't return that night. Harold told us later she asked him to sleep in the guest room. She's thinking, he said. And she doesn't do that often. No one laughed. It wasn't a joke. It was a truth wrapped in resignation. As guests began to trickle out, there were more hugs than usual. Trinity hugged me tightly and whispered, "Thank you for saying what we couldn't." Joyce kissed me on the cheek and said, "You were brave, even if it was messy." Mason gave me a single nod. Nothing more. But it meant something. Camille and I collected our things, her pie dish, a small container of leftovers, a scarf she almost forgot on the banister, and walked quietly to the car. She looked back once toward the house. I asked, "You okay?" She smiled faintly. For the first time, I think I actually might be. I opened her door and helped her in, then climbed into the driver's seat. As we drove away, I reached into the bag of leftovers. Right on top, wrapped in foil, was the pink plastic plate. Camille saw it and burst into quiet laughter. Not bitter, not mocking, just the kind of laugh that comes after a long, painful release. She picked it up and held it for a moment, turning it over in her hands. "Should we throw it away?" I asked. She shook her head, smiling softly. "No, let's keep it." "Why?" "Because it broke everything open," she said. And maybe that's exactly what we needed. The house was unusually quiet when we left. Not silent in the peaceful sense, but quiet like a theater after the actors have taken their final bow. Something had ended. Something had shifted. Camille didn't say much during the drive home. She kept turning the pink plate over in her lap, staring at it like it was an artifact, as if she still couldn't believe that one piece of plastic had carried so much weight. We got home just before 9. Our house felt smaller than usual, but not in a bad way. It felt safe, honest, real. No chandeliers or heirloom china, just the hum of the fridge and the faint smell of cinnamon from Camille's pie leftovers. She dropped her coat over the chair by the door, kicked off her shoes, and sat down at the kitchen table. I joined her, setting the pie dish on the counter and taking 2 forks from the drawer. Neither of us wanted more food, but we picked at the pie anyway. There's something about shared silence after a hard day. It's its own kind of conversation. "You know what I keep thinking about?" she said finally, her voice tired but clear. "What?" "How long we pretended." I nodded. "Yeah. Years, Theo," she said. 3 years of smiling through it. Laughing off baby jokes. Sending fake updates to people who didn't even deserve to know. I told Trinity once we were waiting for the right time. I told my coworkers we were focused on traveling. But really, I was just hoping the next blood test would be different. I reached across the table and took her hand. "We thought if we waited long enough, it would fix itself," I said. "That maybe it was just stress. Or diet. Or bad timing." Camille's eyes filled with tears, but she blinked them back. "And when it didn't, I thought I was the failure. You weren't." "I know that now," she whispered. "But I didn't know it then." That broke my heart. Not because it was new, but because I had lived beside that pain without knowing how deep it truly went. "And then my mother," she continued, voice shaking now, "sat there today and humiliated you in front of everyone." And for a second, I froze. I actually froze. I should have stood up the second I saw that plate. "You stood up when it mattered," I said. "And that means more than you know." She nodded slowly. Then she reached into her purse, pulled out a small folded piece of paper, and slid it toward me. I looked at it, confused. "What's this?" "A fertility clinic brochure," she said. "But a different kind. One that deals with donor embryos. I picked it up 2 weeks ago." "Why didn't you tell me?" "I wasn't ready," she admitted. "I didn't want to get your hopes up. Not after everything. But after today." I realized we've already lived through the worst of it. We survived that storm. Maybe now it's time to see what comes after. I opened the brochure and glanced through it. Photos of smiling couples, hopeful statistics, testimonials that made my throat tighten. Not because they promised miracles, but because they reminded me that we weren't alone. That there were people out there who had walked through the same fire and come out holding something new. I reached across the table and touched her cheek. "Let's do it. Let's see where this goes." She smiled then, a real smile. The kind I hadn't seen in a while. That weekend, we didn't visit anyone. We didn't take calls from family. We just stayed home, talked, watched old movies, and took long walks around the neighborhood. It was like we were rediscovering our marriage in the quiet aftermath. No pressure. No performance. Just us. Then, midweek, something unexpected happened. Camille got a text from her mother. Just 2 words. I'm sorry. No emojis. No long speech. No excuses. Just that. Camille stared at it for a long time, then put her phone down without responding. Are you going to reply? I asked gently. Not yet, she said. But I think I will. 2 days later, Melinda showed up at our front door. No warning. No entourage. Just her, standing on our porch in a pale blue coat and holding something in both hands. I opened the door, heart pounding. Theo, she said quietly. Is Camille home? She is, I said. Do you want to come in? She hesitated for a moment, then nodded. Camille appeared in the hallway, her expression unreadable. Melinda looked at her daughter with a kind of uncertainty I'd never seen on her face before. I know I don't deserve to be here, she said, but I came to try anyway. Then she extended her hands. She was holding the pink plate, but it wasn't whole anymore. The plate had been broken, shattered, from the looks of it, and then pieced back together. Glued along every jagged line, its cheerful cartoon unicorns now interrupted by silver cracks. And in the center, where the face of the biggest unicorn had once smiled, the broken edges had been arranged into the shape of a heart. I destroyed it the night you left, Melinda said. Smashed it in the sink. But then I picked up the pieces. I don't know why. I just couldn't throw it away. Camille stepped forward slowly. She took the plate from her mother's hands and stared at it. A reminder, Melinda said, that even broken things can be made into something better, if you're willing to do the work. Camille's lips parted, but no words came out. Then, to my surprise, she stepped forward and wrapped her mother in a gentle hug. No tears, no apologies, just that simple, shaky embrace. And somehow, it meant more than 100 perfect speeches. We didn't become best friends after that. Melinda didn't turn into a warm and fuzzy grandmother figure overnight, but she started showing up. To clinic appointments, to counseling sessions, to quiet dinners where no one talked about success or failure, but just shared stories, hopes, and the small wins of everyday life. She even started knitting again. Baby booties, little hats. Not with pressure, not as assumptions, just as gifts, symbols, maybe even prayers. One night, Camille and I sat in bed going through paperwork for a new donor program. She held the glued plate in her lap as she reviewed medical forms, her thumb tracing the heart-shaped cracks. This plate used to represent everything that was wrong with our family, she said. Now, it reminds me of how much we've healed. It's still cracked, I said. So are we, she replied, smiling. And we're still here. It was a chilly Saturday morning when we walked into the fertility clinic hand in hand, not with the nervous excitement we had the first time years ago, but with something deeper, something steadier. Camille had on a gray wool coat and no makeup, her hair tucked beneath a knitted beanie Melinda had made. I held the door for her, and as we stepped into the warm waiting room, I realized something remarkable. We weren't afraid anymore. There were still risks, still unknowns. But the shame? The silence? That had been buried back at that Thanksgiving table along with the pink plate. This was a new beginning, one we were choosing on our own terms. Melinda surprised us by showing up that day. We hadn't asked her to come. She didn't even text. She just appeared at the clinic 15 minutes before our consultation, holding a notebook and wearing a pair of reading glasses I didn't know she owned. Camille looked up from the sign-in sheet and blinked. Mom. I called the front desk, Melinda said, slightly out of breath. Told them I was coming. I wanted to learn. I want to understand what this actually means for you. Camille stared at her for a moment, then gave the smallest nod. Okay. So the three of us sat down together, flipping through pamphlets and asking questions. The doctor walked us through donor embryo options, surrogate programs, and even embryo adoption. Every path lined with technical terms and timelines that would have overwhelmed us months ago. But this time, we listened. We didn't panic. We didn't cry. We learned. Melinda asked smart questions. She didn't dominate the conversation, didn't press us with suggestions. She simply listened and took notes, her eyes occasionally flicking up to Camille, who seemed caught between shock and cautious appreciation. When the doctor stepped out to grab a folder, Melinda turned to us and said, I used to think a family had to look a certain way, that motherhood was the crown of womanhood. But I was wrong. Family isn't about biology. It's about showing up, over and over again. Camille didn't answer. She just reached over and squeezed her mother's hand. That night, back at home, We lit a fire in the living room and sat on the floor with mugs of tea, our legs tangled beneath a blanket. Camille held the glued-together pink plate in her lap, her fingers tracing the silver lines in the shape of a heart. "She's trying," she said softly. "I know," I replied. "Do you believe her?" I thought about that. Melinda had spent years crafting an image, enforcing control, drawing lines between who belonged and who didn't. But lately, those lines had started to blur. She still slipped sometimes, commented too harshly, interrupted too much, but then she'd apologize. Without prompting. That was new. "I don't think she knows how to undo everything," I said. "But I think she's willing to try." Camille leaned against me. "That's enough. For now." A few weeks later, we hosted a dinner at our house. Nothing fancy. Just a folding table, a pot roast, and 6 mismatched chairs squeezed into our small dining room. Mason came. So did Trinity and Felix with their twins in tow. Joyce brought wine and one of her strange kale salads. And Melinda, well, she brought paper plates. Everyone stared when she opened the bag and began setting them on the table. Trinity raised an eyebrow. "Since when do you use paper plates?" Melinda didn't flinch. "Since I realized perfect dishes don't make a perfect family." Camille smiled quietly and helped her set them down. We ate. We laughed. We told stories. For once, no one compared salaries or parenting styles. No one asked about due dates or pressured us for updates. They just shared space with us, the way families are supposed to. After dinner, as I was collecting cups from the table, Mason came up behind me and said, "I meant what I said before. You're the one holding this family together now." I turned to him. "I'm not trying to hold it together. I'm just done pretending." He nodded. "That's what I meant." The next day, we received a small box in the mail. No note. No label. Inside were the shards of another pink plate, this one shaped into a mosaic heart, almost identical to the first. Camille picked it up and smiled. "She made a second one," she said. "Why?" Camille turned it over and showed me the back. Etched in gold marker were the words. "One for the past, one for the future." We didn't say anything after that. We just held each other in the kitchen and let the moment sit. Weeks passed. Appointments continued. We finalized our donor application. Every form we signed felt like we were chiseling away the final layers of grief and sculpting something new. Something ours. Then one night, Melinda came over for dinner with a flat cardboard box under her arm. "I brought you something," she said, placing it on the table. Camille and I opened it together. Inside was a table runner, cream-colored, stitched by hand with delicate green vines and bluebirds sewn along the border. In the center, embroidered in neat cursive, were the words, "Built from cracks, held together by choice." Camille traced the stitching with her fingers, her eyes glassy. "It's not perfect," Melinda said, sounding nervous. "It's beautiful," Camille said. We set it on the table that night and ate our takeout over it like it was a feast. Because in many ways, it was. The table we were building wasn't made of heirlooms or rigid expectations. It was made of late-night conversations, therapy sessions, shaky forgiveness, and small acts of showing up. It was built slowly, sometimes painfully, but it was real, and that was more than we ever had before. Christmas at the Royce house was nothing like it used to be. For starters, there were no place cards, no rigid seating arrangements, no passive-aggressive commentary over the ham. And most notably, every single person at the table was eating off paper plates. Not fancy ones, either. These were regular, store-bought, pastel-colored paper plates. The kind you find in the party aisle next to matching napkins with cartoon reindeer. At first glance, it seemed absurd. Laughable, even. A family that once measured worth in silver cutlery, now passing the gravy across flimsy discs of pressed pulp. But to us, it meant everything. Melinda stood at the head of the table, not to command attention, but to raise a small glass of cider and offer a toast. It wasn't her usual drawn-out performance. No stories about the family legacy. No awkward praise for Mason's latest bonus. Just a few simple words. "We're starting fresh," she said, eyes scanning each face. "No more traditions that hurt people, only ones that build them." Camille looked over at me, blinking back tears. I nodded, my own chest tight with emotion I hadn't expected to feel at a family holiday again. Across the table, Trinity smiled, holding one of the twins while her husband, Felix, tried to keep the other from eating the napkin. Joyce clinked her plastic cup against Mason's, who had traded his usual smugness for a humble grin. He hadn't spoken much since Thanksgiving, but his presence here mattered. Sometimes the right people show up quietly and stay. The food was simple. Pot roast, sweet potatoes, stuffing, some cranberry sauce straight from the can. Camille made her famous pecan pie, and I brought my usual bottle of mulled wine. Melinda had cooked most of the meal herself. Not catered, not outsourced. Homemade. Imperfect. Honest. As we ate, there was laughter. Not forced, not nervous, real laughter. Camille shared a story about our failed camping trip where a raccoon stole our marshmallows. Mason chimed in with a surprisingly self-deprecating joke about his terrible date with a woman who thought his name was Miles the entire night. Even Harold, normally quiet and observational, told a story about the year Melinda burned the Christmas turkey and tried to blame the oven manufacturer. When it came time for dessert, Camille disappeared into the kitchen and returned with a covered dish. But instead of placing it on the table, she walked around and handed something to each guest. A small, folded card. I looked at mine and opened it. Inside, in her handwriting, were 5 words. Thank you for showing up. That was it. No long message. No explanation. Just that. Melinda read hers twice, her lips pressed together, and gave Camille a slow, tearful nod. Then she stood and hugged her tight, like a mother who finally understood what love actually looks like when it's no longer measured against expectation. Camille hugged her back, and for the first time in my life, I saw them as equals. Not mother and daughter, not judge and defendant. Just 2 women, flawed, healing, holding each other in shared understanding. Later that night, when the dishes were cleared and the leftovers packed up in mismatched Tupperware, I stepped out onto the back porch. The cold air bit at my cheeks, but I didn't mind. I just needed a minute. A quiet breath to take it all in. Camille joined me a few moments later, wrapped in a blanket. You okay? She asked, resting her head on my shoulder. I am now. She leaned into me. Me too. We stood there for a while, looking out at the yard. The same one where Melinda used to host elaborate Easter egg hunts and carefully choreographed lawn parties. Tonight, it was quiet. Bare trees. A patch of snow. Nothing remarkable. And yet, it felt new. Different. This feels like peace, I said, surprised at how true the words were. Camille nodded. And it only took a unicorn plate and an emotional ambush to get us here. I laughed. Should we frame it? The plate. Yeah. Or maybe donate it to a museum of awkward family moments. She giggled, then grew thoughtful. Actually, I was thinking we could keep it. Put it on the wall of the nursery. I turned slowly. The nursery? Camille smiled, wide and glowing. We got the call this morning. Our donor application was approved. We start the embryo transfer cycle next month. I stared at her, heart thudding. Are you serious? She nodded, tears in her eyes. It's happening, Theo. And just like that, everything else melted away. All the hurt, all the tension, all the years of waiting. They didn't disappear, but they shifted. They became background to something brighter, something blooming. I pulled her close, wrapping both arms around her, and we stood like that in the cold, wrapped in something warmer than any blanket. The next day, Melinda sent a bouquet to our house. No glitter, no over-the-top arrangement, just soft blue hydrangeas with a note that read, "No more Finn." Thanksgiving, the day everything changed. That plate, once meant to insult, had become the symbol of our turning point. Proof that even something childish, something cruel, could be repurposed into something meaningful. A reminder that the things meant to break us often become the things that rebuild us. Weeks later, as we prepped for our first treatment, we made a new family tradition. Every time someone visits, they eat off a paper plate. It's not a joke. It's not a statement. It's just a symbol. A reminder that the table doesn't matter. The people at it do. So when our child finally arrives and one day asks us why there are no fancy dishes like other homes, we'll smile and tell them. This family was built with paper plates and peace.